Welcome everybody. Hey, it's good to see you all. I'm Laura Rogers and this is Power Hour. Our SharePoint Power Hour is a weekly show every Wednesday at 11 Central, and I just demo different things in SharePoint and Office 365, try new things, or demo just things that I've figured out as I'm doing my day-to-day SharePoint consulting and training. I'm Laura Rogers. I'm a SharePoint MVP, and I just do this for fun. But I have my own SharePoint training company. It's called IW Mentor, and we have beginner, power user, and advanced workflows and forms classes. Today's demo is going to be interesting. I'm going to demo a new Microsoft product. I wouldn't really call it a product, but it's a thing that exists in Office 365 called the Common Data Service. So I'm going to demo what that is and how it works and why in the world you would use it. And it's pretty interesting. I had a good time trying it out and testing it. So I'll go ahead and kind of flip over to share my screen and talk about that. Basically, it is in Office 365 and it is related to Power Apps and Flow. So think about this concept of relational databases. Think about maybe access databases that you see floating all around in your company that, yes, they are still there. Plenty of people use them. They're pretty old usually, but access databases, just any kind of other relational databases you might have. Even things that you do in SharePoint where you create SharePoint sites and you have multiple lists related to each other to create custom business solutions. So the Common Data Service is like it's like a database in the cloud. It is a database in the cloud, and it uses a little bit different terminology. So it's got tables. The tables are referred to as entities. So entities is actually a CRM terminology that also refers to their concept of tables. So you basically have entities, which are tables, and you have fields in those tables, and you have the ability to do set up your security for your database and set up different quote pick lists, which are really your different drop-down boxes that you're going to use and share across your different tables. So the concept of the Common Data Service is that in Power Apps and Flow, a fairly new thing that Microsoft has just introduced in the past couple of months is an actual admin portal to be able to control a little bit of the Power Apps and Flow things that are going on in your company. So you can, when you go to the Office 365 Admin Center, you actually have in the list of admin centers, you have Power Apps and Flow listed there, which takes you to this screen that lets you set up what are called environments. So when you have environments, that's your way of having sort of little segregated little areas where people can create different Power Apps and connections and even these common data services. So if you didn't have environments, if you just had everything in one big sort of area, you would just have one common data service, which would be like one database with a giant list of tables and to use for everything in your organization. But since we have environments, we can say, like, think about different categories and be able to segregate it out. So think about different categories of different types of business solutions you want to create. Like maybe you have a bunch of HR apps, maybe you have a bunch of IT apps, maybe you have sales and marketing, and you want to kind of keep those in their own little areas. You can create environments for those. So that allows you to put the connections and the Power Apps and in that one place and have that common data service for that category in that one place. So to no further ado, I will go ahead and share my screen and show you some of this stuff. So let me get the admin center pulled up and go over here. My head is sticking out of the little box here. There we go. Okay. Actually, I need to shrink myself down here because there we go. Okay. So here's your Office 365 Admin Center. And when I scroll down, of course, the thing that I want to show you is right behind my head. I'm going to move this over here. There we go. That's fun. Okay, so I'll go to Admin Centers. And the thing that I want to show you is, see, if I go to Power Apps or Flow, either of those pretty much take me to the same place. And it takes me to this other admin center where I've got environments and data policies. These are the environments I was referring to. So you will have a default one. This is my test tenant. That's just like my Wonder Laura test tenant. So it's just called Laura Rogers in here. This would probably be like, you know, the name of your company. So this is you're going to have a default environment in here. So if you've already started creating Power Apps and Flows, that's where you'll be able to see them. But you have some details, just basic. There isn't that much about the environment itself. You have just information about it, what it's called. And then you have roles in here where you can actually delegate and have certain people with certain roles. So you have environment admins that you can define. You can add people. And you also have makers, which that's where you can enter people's names to add people as makers. And then the database. Now, you're not going to automatically have this common data service. So this default environment of mine called Laura Rogers, I didn't create a database in there. So I go back here. I also have one that's another test that I did, and it doesn't have a database. So I'm not going to click create a database right now, but I want to show you. So this environment that I created, when you it is Laura test, and that's what I'll be working in today. When you create a new environment, you're going to see a screen that's got, basically you just give it a name and you give it a region. And that way you could also segregate your environments out per different regions that your company is in. So you give it a name and a region, and then you have an environment there. So this is the one that I created for the purposes of this demo. Now notice that I not only have environment roles in here, but I also have user roles and permission sets. So when you click that create button and it creates your common data service database, it actually gives you additional things that you can do as far as these different roles, and you have all this different security that you can do. So I've got environment roles I already showed you, and then so this user roles concept is going to be specific to having the database in here. So here are my user roles here. So I have database owner, which is full access to all resources and database schema, and organization user, that's going to be just end users in the organization. It's pretty much makes sense right there. The name of it makes sense. And then you can even have permission sets in there that I don't have any. And then these permission sets. Permission sets are really interesting. So a lot of these kind of look, if you've ever been into SQL and you've ever been into the list of sort of different roles inside of SQL, does this look a little bit familiar to you? So it's kind of like that, but you actually have, I realized that the names of these are congruent with the names of a bunch of default tables. So when you click create a database in here to create your common data service, it gives you a ton of stuff. So instead of just having a blank empty like access database or something, it gives you just all these tables so you can see examples. So tons of examples, there are probably at least 50 or maybe 100 of them in there. And so then I'll show you that in a minute, but it gives you all these entities just out of the box. Of course, I'm sure you could go delete those if you don't need to use them, but you could use those entities as starting points, just kind of like when you go into Microsoft Access and you start, adding tables and creating tables that has a lot of example tables. This is kind of what that's like, except they're just all there. So does this look, have you guys seen this before? Does this look interesting or intriguing to you? All right, I hope so. It's pretty cool. So I noticed that these permission sets are related to, like, I'm looking at the names of them, and it looks like the names of them are congruent with the names of some of the entities that it came with. So for example, this one called View Partner Data, when I click on it, it's going to take a minute. and it's going to show me the details of it. And then look, it's showing me the list of all the entities. So think about entities like SharePoint lists. Okay, so entities are SharePoint lists. So it gives me a list of all the entities, and I can see that this partner entity, it's got a column called read. So view partner data gives them read access to the partner table, basically. So you can create, they have all these very specific granular permission levels in here that they've created just out of the box. So I'm not going to get too granular into the permission stuff because I haven't showed you the actual entities yet. But you can create new permission sets too as well. This concept of data policies, I might cover that later, but that's not really going to be as much related to, I want to get more into the nitty gritty about these entities and what you can do with them, and maybe I'll get to that last, but it's really just a way of segregating out all the connection types that people can use when they're creating your apps and using the common data service. All right. So I went to the admin center, went to the SharePoint, to the Office 365 admin center, and went to the list of admin centers and clicked on either Power Apps or Flow to take me there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my little waffle menu and just go to Power Apps like that. Or you can just go to web.powerapps.com. And of course, I've already authenticated. This is Office 365. I've already authenticated to Office 365. And now I can see, so anytime you're in Power Apps and Flow and you have more than one environment, look at this, you've got a drop-down box. So I can actually flip back and forth between environments. Yes, entities are like SharePoint lists, which are like tables in Access. Julian. Okay, so yeah, so I can actually flip back and forth. So this would have been like my default environment. And these are all the Power Apps that I've created in my default environment and my tenant. And then I've got, and of course, only users that have been added as admins or makers in these environments are going to be able to, flip between, to that environment. So Laura Test is the one that I'm in right now that I created the common data service in. So you got to just kind of keep in mind that, if you don't see what you're looking for when you just go to this default web.powerapps.com, be sure that you're in the right environment if you actually have multiple environments. So check that out. So now I'm in my environment. I haven't created any Power Apps yet. So if I go to apps, those are all the default ones that Microsoft gives you that you can kind of play around with. I created, so in connections, I actually created a connection. I only created one. And so this is to the common data service. So creating a connection, once you have the common data service and you've set it up and you've got all your entities, and when you start using it or using it in a Power App or using it in Flows, then you would need to create a connection to be able to interface with it. So I'm not going to go too far into that right now either. Flows, I don't have any flows in this particular environment. And I don't have any gateways. Gateways are going to be if you have on-premises data that you want to be able to talk back and forth to. And I apparently in this environment, I have some setting that doesn't allow me to set up gateways in here. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. All right, so here's the meat of it. I go down here to Common Data Service and I go to Entities, and this is the long list of all the entities that it gives me out of the box. So it's kind of a lot, a little overwhelming there. So let's see. So you can see that it's got just a lot of, these are all just examples. So leads, opportunities, it's got, maybe you could create your own CRM system. It's got leads, opportunities, purchase orders. You could do all kinds of stuff with purchase ordering. But basically this is going to be like looking at a database and Access and looking at all the tables in that database. All right, so next to each database, you're going to have the ability to open it in Excel, which is awesome, import data, export data, or export a template. So with each entity, if I wanted to, if I had other data that's in some other system and I want to be able to import it into this entity, like account, maybe I have a list of accounts somewhere else and I want to be able to pull it in here. I can actually export a template of this entity, which would basically be like spitting out a spreadsheet with just a bunch of column headers in it. And then that gives me like a blank spreadsheet that then I can put my data in nice and neatly and then be able to import it in with no issues. So you don't have to export a template, but you could in order to make the importing of the data easier. Pretty cool, right? So you guys feel free to ask me questions as I go. I'm just going to keep on rambling. This is so much fun. All right, so let's go look at, before we go create a new entity, oops, I just dragged that out of the way. Before we go create a new entity, we're going to go just look at some of the ones in here. So I'll go just click on case here. And ooh, look, see, those are all the fields in my entity. So what can I do in here? I've got, I could see that I've got a bunch of fields with different field types, auto number, text, date and time. This pick list is like a choice list. So that's when you want to have multiple choice lists. That's their concept of having choices, is a pick list. And then we have date and time, multi-line text, just a lot of the same concepts that you're going to be used to in your SharePoint columns. Just a lot of the same sort of field types, column types that you have in here. So you could go into and kind of, when I click on each one of these, it's actually got different settings in here to say whether it's unique, required, and I can even say whether it's searchable. You do have the ability in SharePoint to make columns not searchable too. It's just in site setting. It's not settings. It's not really obvious, and they're all searchable by default. And then I can click through these, and I can see like this one is a pick list, and I can say that I can see that the pick list that it's using is case status. So for any field, when I click the little ellipsis, I can just undo something I just did or delete it from here, and I can just see all my list of fields. So up at the top though, there are some other tabs across the top. So key is going to be, these are going to be things that are, it's showing me the key field, which is the unique field, which is case ID in this case. And SharePoint has an out-of-the-box unique ID, which is just called ID. That's in every list and library, right? So as I'm showing this to you guys, see if you can think of things in your organization that maybe you'd be able to use this for, or think of maybe some access database that some end users are using that maybe you'd want to put in here so that you can get people off of access. And it seems like it would be, and I'll show you kind of the process of doing that too. I've already done a little bit of it. It is a little bit of work getting it from access into here, but I still think it's probably, I don't know, I'm trying to think about, access to SharePoint versus access to this, because you have to get the data in, but then creating the user interface is a whole other story, right? This is just the data. This is just the fields and information about the field. So then the Power App would be what you would create to interface with the data. That would be your front end. So the back end, this is the back end. This is like the tables in Access or SQL. And then the front end would be like your forms and reports in Access would be what you would do like in Power Apps. Okay, so you've got relationships, which is really nice. So in SharePoint, if you went to relationships, then you wouldn't really have just a list in one place of relationships. You'd have to go look at all just the names of the columns in a list and just look for the ones that say lookup. So these are all lookup fields to other entities, just like lookups in SharePoint that are lookups to other lists, right? Let's see. Oh, hey, Jonathan. John says package delivery logs that the mailroom uses could use this. Ooh, yeah. So yeah, I love getting this feedback from you guys. This is fun. Okay, so you have a list of relationships just right here so you can see them all in one place. And then you have field groups, which is an interesting concept. I love this concept. I wish we had this concept in SharePoint. This is a way of categorizing your fields. So I have default card, default create, default details. So let's go look at one of these field groups and see what we see here. So when I define a field group, I'm basically giving it, I'm taking fields that exist in my entity and I'm putting them over on the right side to say these are the field groups that I want to exist in this. Like basically default create means when somebody's creating something. So that's where I would say these are the fields to use when something's getting created. So that way I could just define them all in one place like that, and then I'd be able to search for some more. Let's go see what it looks like to create a new field group. Let's see. Ooh, this one's actually looks like it's locked down. Maybe when I go create my own entity, I'll be able to do that. And then I've got the data. So this is the data that's actually in this list. So these are actual cases that exist. This is all this sample data that Microsoft has put in here. There's a whole bunch in here. So it says I'm making a maintenance tracker for my work and want to use Power Apps and Flow. So I'll put all the assets in entity and give them each a key or ID that does not repeat. Yes, and they will automatically have an auto ID, basically. Yeah, this is very cool. So it shows you your data, but watch this. This is so cool. Okay, open in Excel. So let's see if it did it. This is gonna blow your mind. This is some nerdy fun. Right? Okay, so it pulls up Excel, and I'm going to click Enable Editing. I, as an end user, if you didn't want to bother creating like a front end for the users, like forms and Power Apps and stuff, you could let them go directly into the tables like this. So it's actually the first time you do this, it's going to say, hey, do you want to use this add-in or do you trust this add-in? It actually puts this Microsoft Power Apps Office add-in in your Excel. Cool, right? Like way too excited about this. So watch this though. When I click through the different fields in here, I can see it's got an interface in here on the right. Look at the pane on the right. It actually changes as I go between these. So I'll create a new row and I'll say testing test problem. These are cases or something. Look at this. When I go to the date field, it has a date picker. So that's how I pick my date, and actually puts the value in that cell. And then when I go to the severity, I just pick a severity level, status, I'll just say active. It doesn't let me tab after I pick something. That's kind of annoying. Problem, and then origin, phone. Look at this though. This is a lookup field to another table. It actually pulls in all the lookup field information and lets me go pick a person. And that's like the picking that record from that other entity right here as sort of like a drop down. And then this is more of a description. So anything that's a text field, they're just going to be typing it in the cell. But anything else, they're going to be picking it, like if it's from a picker or date picker, they could do it over here. So if I clicked refresh right now, it would give me an error and say, hey, you just added a record. If you refresh the data and it pulls in new data, it's going to overwrite and you're going to lose the record you just added, basically. So I can click publish, and that actually saves my record in here. So, all right, so I can, so that's a really cool little end user interface directly into these little tables. I don't even have to save this spreadsheet. I mean, I guess technically I could just have the end user just pull up that spreadsheet directly from their desktop or something and just start typing away and entering in their stuff. That's not the prettiest end user interface, but it's possible. It's really cool. So I could, so that's kind of how I get around in here and how I can see the data. So once I'm in any of these entities, I can always just click open in Excel and it will open it directly in there. All right, so I'll go ahead and go back and look at my list of entities again. So let's see. So I've got some people, I've got organization, I've got a couple that I actually did, that I created myself. So I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like to create a new entity. When I create a new entity, let me fix this thing. Oops. Let me see what I did over here. there we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, new entity. You got it when you give it a name, you can't change the name afterwards. So it's pretty permanent. Kind of like a SharePoint list though, because a SharePoint list, technically the name kind of stays in there as the URL to that list after you create it. So that's kind of the same concept. Like it's not gonna, let's see, I don't know. You're not gonna be able to change the actual behind the scenes name. You will be able to change the display name. So I'll just call this test, whatever. And then I go next. And then it gives me a bunch of fields out of the box. It gives me some primary ID. This is what we're talking about. Everything will have a primary ID. And just like SharePoint, it's going to have created by, modified by, created record date, modified record date. Now, I'm not sure what the difference is between those concepts, created by and, oh yeah, so created by is a person, duh, and create record date is a date. Okay, yeah. So those are the fields you're going to get, and then you just click create, and then you'd have an entity just kind of listed with all your other ones, and you can click add field here. So yeah, so what I decided to do was take this database of mine and see what the experience would be like taking this Access database and putting it into here to be able to potentially use that as kind of walk through what the experience would be like if you went onto your company and found some old database people were using and say, hey, let's put it in Common Data Service now, because I think that's a great sort of case for that. So you guys are going to think this is awesome. This is my database. This was the first IT job that I had. I had basically I was the help desk. I was the whole help desk for this small company that doesn't even exist anymore. And so my predecessor she just had a log, like a piece of paper with rows that she had just been writing down issues whenever people called the help desk. And when somebody called again, she'd have to like flip back a few pages to go find related issues or anything like that. And it was just a big log. So I know, isn't this cute? So this was probably 15 or 20 years ago. I created this database and it was so much fun. I was in this thing all day, every day. So here were all of our stores. And then I could go double click on a store and I could look at the previous issues. I could go quickly create a new issue. But like this is the person that called, what their category was, and then for the same issue, if they called multiple times, then we had, blah, 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 whatever. So it's got issues, and it's got a list of locations, and it's got even information about the PCs for everyone. So I can go to any of these and look at what we're dealing with their operating system. We gotta love these operating systems, right? And I was keeping track of all their software and service tags and stuff like that. So that was it's my baby. It was a lot of fun. And so I just took it upon myself to create this whole database. So this is kind of how I learned relational databases, just by figuring it out and playing with it and just trying stuff. So this is what I fell in love with, doing this stuff. And then when SharePoint came along, it's just like, oh, I can do this same kind of stuff and not have to be like buried in this Access file just on your desktop or on a network share. You could actually use it on the web. So I don't know if you guys remember, but Access came out with a web forms concept back in, like 99 or so. And I thought that was cool. I was trying to put the web forms on our intranet. I created an intranet. Anyway, all right, so this is the database that I decided to try and use. So I took like this issues list and so right click. So these are kind of the steps that I had to do to be able to do one of these. So I had to go, basically you have to go export every table, because when you import it into the Common Data Service, it has to be as an Excel or CSV file. So you have to go through every table. So I'll just go, let's see, like some of these like OS and stuff like that, I could have those as pick lists in Common Data Service. I wouldn't necessarily need to have every single one of these as as an entity, but like calls, I would go export. So you're going to export it to Excel, and I'm just going to say, okay, so now I've got this Excel spreadsheet. So it exported it to Excel. So then I was like, well, then I'll just go over to here and just hit import. Well, you have to have a new entity to, you have to have an entity to import it to. You can't just import it to Common Data Service and it's not going to create one. So you have to create the entity ahead of time, unfortunately. So I'll just do another one real quick. I'll just call it these are all the different calls, so you could have multiple calls associated with the same issue, right? So then it's going to give me these out of the box fields, and I just click create. So then I was like, okay, so now I'll try just importing my data. Well, when you import the data, you have to map all the fields to fields in the entity. So I can't just import the data. So then I have to go into my new entity and go create fields manually for all those things. So I would have to go open up that spreadsheet and say I've got, all right, the date of the call, who called, and this is going to be a lookup to like a unique ID and oh, who called who. That's whether they called me or I called them. And then notes and issue ID. So I'm going to have to go create all those fields manually. So I noticed for one of these that I had, so like who called who is a good example. Who called who is just a table that contains two different items, like I called them or they called me. But I store it, since it's a lookup, it's storing it as an ID, right? Just like in SharePoint. So when I try, if I want to just import this data, and I can't do it as one of these pick lists, because in the pick list, I tried putting the values as 1 and 2 instead of so that it would match when you import it. It wouldn't let me put values as 1 and 2. it says you have to have text, like text has to be at least the first character of the value of the pick list item. So I would actually have to go into this spreadsheet and do like a find and replace and say replace 2 with they called me and replace 1 with I called them, or whatever the values are going to need to be. Same thing with like one of them had status like active or inactive and it had just 1s and 2s. So then I'd have to go replace it with the actual words, and then go when I go over to my entity and I'm creating a pick list, then I would have to create the pick list that has those 2 words in it. So then when I'm creating my entity, I can use create that pick list ahead of time, so when I import it, it'll all match up. So watch this. I'll show you what it looks like to import. So I'm not going to be able to import it because I haven't created all the fields yet. But I'll go ahead and do calls is the one that I just created. So let's see, WSD calls is my calls list, and then here's the mapping. Okay, so it's going to have here down the left are all the columns in my spreadsheet, and then the ones down the right this is where I'd have to map it to the fields that exist over in that entity. So that's why you have to create them in the entity ahead of time. So I actually did one of these for you guys without having to put you through the pain of all that. I don't know how fun this is for you, but it's pretty cool to me. And so WSD issues, I did that for. So I create issue date, notes, caller, problem category, and issue status. So you see problem category is a pick list. And then I imported all the data. Let's go look at the data. And yeah, there it is. So it's got, now this last modified by, I created that as a people picker. When I created the field in the entity, I created as a people picker. So maybe that wasn't the best idea, because the values in the spreadsheet were just people's names. They were just in this column. It just had like Madeline, Sue, whatever. All right. So, but it brought all my notes and issue dates and all this stuff like that. So for surname, Okay, so that's what I did. I mapped when I was mapping it, since I had created a people field in the entity, when I was mapping the fields from the spreadsheet to the entity, the people field had actually been split up into multiple sections. So it had like surname, middle name, given name, and stuff like that. So I mapped the surname field to that person's name that I had in the column. So that's what it was. Yeah, I know. This could be pretty painful. So I did get all my data. I mean, I had like 300 something records. So I did get all my data in here, but I'd say, it's going to depend on the complexity of every individual table that you have, the number of tables, the number of columns, how many different like lookups and weirdness that you have to deal with. But the whole process of just getting the data in here could take a while. But if you export that template first, that will actually help you to have a template. I exported them straight from Access. So the data was pretty, much nice and neat and in order when I exported it from Access. So I didn't really have to worry about that. But let's go look at any reason why People Picker comes through as a GUID. I think I don't know. We'll have to go look. I'm interested to see kind of what that's going to look like in Power Apps and maybe in that Excel interface, because that might just be how it stores it, because SharePoint kind of stores it in a weird way like that too. But they're probably going to all say they're created by me. Well, we'll go look at that real quick. Well, created by isn't something that you can usually edit, so I don't know. I'll open it in Excel and just see. Because one of these I actually created as a People Picker. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, that's weird. So it just put them as different columns in here. That doesn't really make sense, does it? I'm not sure if it did that. Maybe I screwed it up because of the way I mapped the stuff when I was pulling it in. I'm not sure. But yeah, People Pickers could be interesting to deal with. All right, let me close that. Okay, cancel. All right, settings. What do we have in our entity settings? It's just the name and description. Let's also go into, let's see what else we can do with fields. I don't think we can do anything. Let's do a new field group in here. Oh, it doesn't let me do new field groups. It just has them all built in. That's interesting. Huh, look at that. It's all locked down. Field group details. I'm intrigued by the field groups thing, but I'm not sure what to really do with it because it doesn't let me really edit them or do anything with them. So field groups, huh? All right, so let's go back to here. And now notice that you have the ability to do import data, export data, clear all data. So clear all data would probably be what you'd want to do maybe when you start, by creating the common data service and you actually want to use this in production. Then you'd probably not want to have all the Microsoft test data in here, right? So you could probably just go clear all that out. And then let's go look at what the productivity settings are. So this is really interesting. I'm not going to install this, but the Power Apps CDS Outlook add-in is some sort of add-in that would let you do things in Outlook that would do something in Power Apps. This is one of those things that I kind of wanted to research more and kind of figure out what that would do. I don't know if that's a Devi type thing or if that's just something that somebody like me would be able to do. So I'm not sure. Okay, so now if you want to use your entities and actually, create some sort of database, then what you could do is you could go to apps here, and I want to maybe create a new one. I don't want to see all the sample ones. I want to let me go home and create an app, get started. So I'll go ahead and do this. Let me just do this in Power Apps on my computer. Does the service show what Power Apps in our flows are using the fields from it? That's a great question, Jonathan. Let me see. Yeah, I don't know where you'd even see that. Because for the connection, Jonathan, you're really just saying, just connect to the common data service, and you're just authenticating to it. So you're not really defining anything else about it. So for the connection, you wouldn't be doing that. So kind of like in SharePoint, there's nothing in each field that could tell you what views you're using the field in. Now, if you're using content types, then there's kind of a way to do that. But that seems like that's kind of what that concept would be like. You know, how's it going to know which fields? What I also wanted to show you, though, is I want to show you now that we've gotten a little bit more into the fields and the concepts inside of these entities, I want to show you a little bit more, and we can look at more of the security. So for example, I've got permission sets here. Now let's see if it automatically creates some permission sets when I create the new entity. So let's go down to the bottom. So I don't see anything that has, let's see. No, it doesn't have anything with a W in it for my new ones that I had. I don't know what import, oh, PKG, that's some sort of iOS thing. So not really relevant to me, but I can do, let me scroll back to the top and do a new permission set. So I'm going to call this WSD issues, maybe issue create. Can create issues. And go. Okay, so now it's creating a permission set. So remember, when I create a permission set, it's going to give me all these options that I can do that has to do with, it's going to have a list of all my entities in that whole common data service. That's why you want to keep them segregated into environments. And it's going to let me pick what to define what WSD issue create means. So to me, and this is called CRUD for those of you who aren't devs or database geeks. CRUD, create, read, update, delete. So these are CRUD, your CRUD options, whatever you call them. All right, so I'm going to go down and look at the bottom, my WSD ones. So create, read, update, delete, CRUD. So maybe for when I'm saying they can create issues, maybe I really want them to create both issues and calls, but I don't want them to be able to edit them necessarily. So I'm only allowing them to create. So this is kind of the similar concept. Of course, it's just like, it's the same concepts as permissions in SharePoint. It's just a completely different interface to be able to do kind of some of the same things. So in SharePoint, you could create custom permission levels. You could create a custom permission level that only allows people to add items to a list. So you could totally do that. So then this concept of picking from this long list of items and checking boxes would be like going to the permission screens on the different lists in SharePoint and saying, you know, tell them to split off permissions, and then defining what specific permissions you want people to be able to do in each list. So that's kind of what this is. So I went ahead and picked a couple, and I don't see a save button or anything. It's just, okay. Oh, did it have a save? Maybe it did. I'm going to go back and look at it real quick and see if it had one. I don't think it really matters, but it's gonna, so the next thing that's gonna matter is to be able to apply and say which users. So there we go. So I put checkboxes in those, and then I have to go back to details and then save it. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so now it's saved. And then when I'm looking at my, so back over here in the Power App itself, Then I'm going to go, let's see, wait a minute, hold on. Let me remember where I am. User roles, that's what it is. So I'm still, okay, I'm still in the admin center. So I created the custom permission set in the admin center. And then I want to say, give people roles in here. So I could say new role. I can say, so the database end user, I'm defining it as, basically I'm going to say for end users, I want them to just be able to create calls and issues. So then I have, that's weird how it lets you create it, but then you have to go back in and hit edit to actually make it do something. It's a little awkward. And here's where I would give, put users in here. So let's see if I've got one. Yeah, there we go. This is my Wonderlar account. So then I could say who are my users, and then permission sets WSD issue create. So I'm defining this, I'm saying who the users are and what permission sets they have. And I'm defining that in here. Let's see, do I need to, let me save that? Here we go. So you put all your users in there. So this is a little bit of a twisted up, sort of backwards way of doing permissions, kind of compared to the way you do it in SharePoint, but it's more similar to kind of the way you do it in SQL, right? Not that I know anything about SQL. All right, so I'm just defining that as kind of like how you define like maybe the name of a SharePoint group. So in a SharePoint group, you'd say just give it a name like project managers or end users, and then you're going to define what you want those people to be able to do in that particular location. So that's that. All right, so then those users would be the ones that would be able to go do those things in those fields. I could have sworn I saw field level permissions in here somewhere, but I was probably just imagining things. Yeah, okay. So then you could kind of take this full circle and you could go create a new Power App. So I'll do like new, start with your data. So this is my common data service. And I could just start with that in a phone layout. All these ones where you start with your data are in a phone layout. I don't have to do that. I could just go, you know, I know you've seen me create Power Apps multiple times at this point, but I can just do a blank one. So having a tablet layout would give people more of that interface that they'd be expecting if they're used to using Microsoft Access, right? So for my content, I have to go add a data source, right? And then I need to, so there's my common data source. Oh, so watch this. I'm in the wrong what? I'm in the wrong environment. So I have to go to here. Oh, where did I see it? New. Oh, I saw it in here a minute ago. Connection. No, not connections. Crap. You have to go in here and actually flip over to the other environment. Hold on a second. File, new. No. It was very obvious. I mean, it was like right in front of me when I did this. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. So when I go to my name up here, found it. All right. So then I have to flip over to that other environment. So from within Power Apps, when you're creating your Power App, you have to tell it what environment you're in, or else you won't have access to that common data service or those connections that you defined in that environment. So now I'm in the right environment. So now I'm going to do a new blank app and add a data source. And you can see that I've actually only got one data source in there because I only created, remember I created that one connection. And when I looked at the list of connections, it was just that one to the common data service. So what are some other connections I can create? I can create connections to SharePoint, Office 365, SQL, Twitter, Instagram, all these other services, Google Spreadsheets, Google Contacts. They're probably getting to be maybe even 100 of them in there. There are a lot of different types of connections you can create. So the common data service is just one of them. So if you already have your data in SQL and you just want to use that, I mean, you don't need to use the Common Data Service. You could just tap directly into it from here. So Common Data Service seems like it's more of like a business user, power user type thing, where maybe you don't have SQL, you don't have access to a SQL database, or you're creating something from scratch and you need to just have it be somewhere nice and easy where you don't have to depend on the data center or the engineers and things like that. You just want to have it in the cloud. Let's see. So Jonathan says if you're in the wrong environment and it has a common data service, you could create a Power App linking to the wrong service then. Yes. Yes. So if I was in an environment that had a completely different common data service and a completely different set of entities, then I would be looking at the wrong set of entities right now, and I wouldn't see the ones that I had just created. So like here are the ones that I created, and I can pull those in. And so any other questions while I'm waiting for this data to import? All right, so on my main screen, what do I want to put on here? I want to put a, so before, when I had it in Access, I had a list of all the stores down the left, and I picked a store, and then I was able to go look at like the issues and calls and stuff having to do with that store. So I could do like a vertical gallery with, well, I don't really want the image one. Sorry, never mind. And I showed you guys galleries last week. So the concept that I would use here is I would do a vertical gallery, whatever, all right? And then I would go point it to, and this was like, I spent the whole hour last time in Power Hour doing this, but I would point it to my data source, and then it would be the WSD number anyway. So that's how you would do, then you'd start building your galleries and building your different forms, and then building out the database to kind of make it look nice and comfy and cozy like they're used to having it in Access. So yeah, that would be a ton of work to rebuild all those buttons and all those screens. And but you know, if you need that functionality, and if having it on in the cloud is going to be worth it, then you want to get rid of Access, and you want to get rid of all these legacy things like floating around in people's hard drives and on network shares, and that like hog all this bandwidth when you try and open them up and all stuff like that. So have I previously made a video on how to create a SharePoint list? No, because that's just one button. No, that's not video necessary, but I can show you real quick. See, I can go to SharePoint in Office 365, and you have to be in a SharePoint site. I have a demo one, I think. And they keep moving it around, but it's just this add an app button in the gear. So, and then that it gives you a bunch of different templates. They have SharePoint lists have a bunch of templates, but that's where you'd create your list and just pick which template you want. Alrighty, I got 6 minutes left. I'll just go ahead and I've got a couple of other things going on. I've got my speaking engagements. If you guys are around here, I run the SharePoint user group in Birmingham, Alabama. Lori and I run it, and I'm speaking at that next week. I'm doing a Power Apps presentation. And then our SharePoint user group in Atlanta, or the SharePoint user group in Atlanta, I'll be speaking there too. My computer just made a sound. I'm not sure why. Okay. Anyway, I'll be speaking there the 16th. And then as far as Power Hour, here's the schedule. It's also on my site. This was today's, of course. And then I'll talk about controls and Power Apps next week. So controls are going to be all these different things, and we'll talk about how to configure controls and how to make them work with, you know, because when people are working with your apps on mobile phones, like they might like to have nice little things like toggles and sliders and things they can easily click on, maybe instead of maybe the traditional sort of SharePoint-y controls that you might be using. So I'll go over controls next week, and then we'll do some SharePoint Designer, good old SharePoint Designer 2013 workflows that I love so much. We'll talk about that. And then I'm actually going to have a guest on the 25th here at my house, one of my user group friends, Nick. All right, so I think that's about all I have. And you guys feel free to just in the general channel here in Slack, just, you know, make comments about suggestions for classes and things like that. It seems like half the time we've done like 200 or 300 of these now. Half the time people make suggestions. I'm like, oh, I already did a power hour on that. So if you're wondering how to go figure out what power hours I've already done, you could always just go on YouTube and search for SharePoint power hour and then whatever your keyword is. But you can also go right here on my channel, and it's got this little search box right in the middle, and you can go just type a keyword there and be able to go, you know, see if I've done something on any given topic. All right. Thanks everybody for coming.